After 43 years on this bench, I thought I understood what it meant to see the truth. I've watched thousands of witnesses testify. I've studied the way hands shake when people lie, the way a jaw tightens right before someone says something they don't believe themselves. 43 years of reading faces to find the truth hiding behind them. But on a cold Tuesday morning in February, a man walked into my courtroom who had been blind for 35 years, and he taught me that seeing isn't always about eyes. What he described that day, the details he knew, the evidence he laid out piece by piece without ever having seen a single one of them, left every person in that room speechless, myself included. And when I finally asked him the question everyone was silently thinking, "How did you know?" his answer changed the way I think about perception, about truth, and about what it means to witness something. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because this is a story about a man who lost his sight but gained a kind of awareness most of us with perfect vision will never come close to having. It's a story about betrayal, uncovered not through seeing, but through every other sense a human being has, working together, quietly, patiently, for 8 months to reveal a truth that someone else was so sure could never be found. But before I tell you the whole thing, and I promise you it's going to make you think about your own senses in a completely different way, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me if you've ever noticed something important without actually seeing it. Because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard, not just watched. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've sat as a municipal court judge in Providence, Rhode Island since 1982. That's 43 years of seeing people on their best days and on their absolute worst. 43 years of listening to stories, watching faces, trying to pull truth out from underneath lies people have rehearsed in front of a mirror. Every morning I wake up at 5:30. I make my coffee strong and black, no sugar, exactly the way my father taught me to make it. My father came to this country from Italy with nothing but hope and a pair of work boots. He laid concrete and framed houses his entire life, and he used to tell me that a man who only trusts his eyes gets robbed blind. He'd say, "Pay attention to how people sound when they speak. Listen to the voice underneath the words. Feel the energy in a room before you even look at who's standing in it. Your eyes can be fooled easier than any of your other senses." I nodded along as a girl, the way children do when they don't yet understand what a parent is trying to hand them. I didn't fully understand what he meant, not in my bones, until the day David Morrison walked into my courtroom with a guide dog at his side and a case file that would change how I listened for the rest of my career. I arrive at the courthouse every morning at 8:15 sharp. My clerk, Margaret, has been with me for 27 years. She has my case files organized on my desk before I even hang up my coat, and she knows I need a few quiet minutes with my coffee before the day begins. That Tuesday morning, February 21st, Margaret looked unusually somber when I walked in. She stood up almost the moment I reached the doorway. "Judge," she said quietly, "we've got a difficult one today. Divorce proceeding. The husband is blind, has been since he was a boy. He's filing based on adultery, and the wife's contesting it, arguing he couldn't possibly know what he's alleging." I took the file and sat down at my desk. The case was captioned Morrison versus Morrison. David Morrison, 47, and Jennifer Morrison, 45. Married 18 years. David was petitioning for divorce on grounds of adultery and requesting full custody of their 2 children, a 16-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy. He alleged his wife had been having an affair with their next-door neighbor, Thomas Bradley, for approximately 8 months. What struck me immediately wasn't just the accusation, it was the precision. Specific dates, specific time windows, a level of detail I don't often see even from private investigators. But here's what made this case unlike anything that had ever crossed my desk. David Morrison had been completely blind since age 12. A car accident had crushed both optic nerves beyond repair. No vision whatsoever, not shapes, not shadows, not even light against dark. Jennifer Morrison's response was, in its own way, more revealing than her attorney probably intended. She didn't deny the affair had happened. She denied that her husband could possibly have known about it. Stripped of legal language, her argument came down to something breathtakingly simple. He's blind, he can't see, he has no proof, he imagined the whole thing. I sat with that file for a long moment, reading through the evidence David had submitted. It was extensive, detailed, specific, down to the minute in places, and every piece of it was built on senses other than sight. At 9:30 that morning, I walked into my courtroom for what was supposed to be a preliminary hearing to determine whether David's evidence was even admissible given his blindness. He sat at the plaintiff's table beside his attorney, a sharp, composed woman named Sarah Chen. Beside him, lying calmly at his feet, was a beautiful golden retriever wearing a service vest, her name tag reading Justice. Across the room, Jennifer sat with her own attorney, and I noticed something in her posture right away. a confidence, almost smugness, as though she genuinely believed her husband's blindness made him powerless in this room. I called the court to order and took a moment to look at both of them. David was a striking man, athletic build, dark hair going gray at the temples, dressed sharp in a way that told me he cared how he presented himself, even though he'd never see the reflection. His face turned toward the sound of my voice the moment I spoke, but behind his dark glasses, his eyes couldn't find me. Jennifer, by contrast, kept glancing at her husband with an expression I can only describe as pity laced with contempt. "Mr. Morrison," I began, "I've read your filing. You're seeking a divorce on grounds of adultery, alleging an affair between your wife and your neighbor, Thomas Bradley. Your wife's counsel is contesting the validity of your evidence, essentially arguing that your blindness makes such knowledge impossible. What do you have to say to that?" His attorney started to rise, but David reached out and touched her arm gently. "Your Honor, if it's permitted, I'd like to respond myself." His voice was calm, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, not out of nervousness, but out of respect for how much it mattered. I nodded, then caught myself, remembering he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, please, go ahead." He rose to his feet, and Justice rose with him, holding position at his left side. His hand found the edge of the table, orienting himself, and then he began to speak. "Your Honor, I lost my sight 35 years ago. I was 12. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit our family's car, damaging both my optic nerves beyond repair. I've been completely blind ever since." His jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign of what this was costing him. When you lose your sight as a child, your other senses don't just compensate, they become extraordinary. I've spent 35 years learning to perceive the world through sound, smell, touch, and a kind of intuition sighted people never have reason to develop. Jennifer's attorney stood then. "Your Honor, this is very touching, but Mr. Morrison's enhanced senses don't constitute—" I held up a hand before he could finish. "Counselor, I'd like to hear what Mr. Morrison has to say in full. Please continue, Mr. Morrison." He nodded toward the sound of my voice. "Your Honor, my wife believes that because I can't see, I can't know, but I know things that sighted people miss every single day of their lives. I know when someone is lying because I hear the slight catch in their voice, that half-second hesitation most people don't even notice they're making. I know when someone is nervous because I smell the change in their perspiration. It's chemically different from ordinary sweat, sharper. I know when something in my home has been moved, even slightly, because I have memorized the location of every object in that house down to the centimeter." He took a breath. "And I know that my wife has been having an affair with our neighbor because I documented it systematically, using every sense I have except sight." "Documented it how exactly?" I asked. "May I present my evidence, Your Honor?" "Please." His attorney handed him a folder. His fingers moved across its surface, reading Braille labels he had made himself, organizing 8 months of a broken heart into something a court could examine. He pulled out the first document. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with smell. It's one of the most powerful senses we have and also one of the most overlooked. I've cataloged the scents of my home for 18 years. I know exactly what our house smells like on an ordinary day. I know my wife's perfume. I know what I smell like after a long day. I know what my children smell like, their shampoo, their laundry detergent, the particular smell teenage boys carry around after gym class." A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. 8 months ago, I started noticing a foreign scent in our home, specifically in our bedroom. It appeared every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, between 2 and 4 o'clock. "What kind of scent?" "Cologne, men's cologne, specifically Armani Code. I went to a department store and had a clerk walk me through nearly every men's cologne on the shelf until I found the match. I don't wear cologne, Your Honor. I never have. It interferes with my ability to smell everything else around me, so I've avoided it my whole adult life. The only men who regularly entered our home were our 2 teenage sons, who also don't wear cologne, and delivery drivers who never made it past the front porch." Jennifer shifted in her chair. Her attorney leaned in and whispered something I couldn't catch. "I found that scent on our bed sheets," David continued, his voice steady, "on my wife's pillow, on the guest bathroom towels, always on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons." He pulled a second document from the folder. "After that, I focused on sound. I've memorized the sounds of our neighborhood the way most people memorize faces. I know every car on our street by its engine. I know the mail truck arrives at 11:30. I know Mrs. Patterson next door gets home at 3:15. And I know that Mr. Bradley 2 houses down drives a Ford F-150 with a distinctive rattle in the muffler he's never fixed. And I prompted, though by that point I already had a fairly good sense of where this was heading. Every Tuesday and Thursday at approximately 2 o'clock, Mr. Bradley's truck pulls into our driveway. I hear it clearly because I'm usually in my study at that hour, which faces the driveway. The engine shuts off. I hear his footsteps on our walkway, 23 steps from where he parks to our front door. He wears boots, based on the sound of the soles. The door opens, but there's no doorbell. My wife is expecting him. I hear them greet each other, and her voice changes when she talks to him. It softens. It gets breathier. I've been married to this woman for 18 years, Your Honor. I know every register of her voice the way a musician knows an instrument. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Every person in that room, myself included, was listening to a blind man describe in granular detail things he could not possibly have seen, yet knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt. I hear them walk upstairs, David went on. 42 stairs. I've counted them every day for 18 years. I hear the bedroom door close. I hear the lock click. Jennifer's face had drained of color. I hear sounds, Your Honor, that make it unmistakably clear what is happening. I won't describe them out of respect for this court and my children, but there's no ambiguity. About an hour later, I hear the shower running, then footsteps back down the stairs, slower, more casual than the ones going up. I hear them talking quietly near the door. Then his truck starts and pulls away. 30 minutes later, the shower runs a second time, my wife showering again. He set the second document down and drew out a third. Your Honor, I also documented this through touch and spatial awareness, a kind of echolocation, sensing objects and changes in a room through the way sound reflects off surfaces. It's not mystical, just years of practice paying attention to what sighted people never have to. When something in my house moves even slightly, I know it. After these visits, I began noticing changes. The passenger seat in our car had been adjusted 6 inches back. I'm 5'10". My wife is 5'4". That seat was set for someone considerably taller than either of us. I measured it to be sure. The nightstand on what used to be my side of the bed had shifted 3 inches. The reading chair in the corner had been turned roughly 15 degrees. Small changes sighted people walk past every day without registering. I notice everything, Your Honor, because noticing everything is the only way I've ever navigated my life. He paused, and for the first time, I heard something crack, just barely, beneath the calm in his voice. I also noticed my wife's behavior changing. She started doing laundry more frequently, always on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I heard the washing machine running, always the same load, bed sheets. She was washing away the evidence before I could ever ask her to explain it. Jennifer's attorney stood again. Your Honor, this is all circumstantial. This is a man's imagination working overtime, filling in gaps with assumptions. Counselor, I said, I'd like to hear the rest before we discuss what is or isn't circumstantial. Mr. Morrison, is there more? Yes, Your Honor. I installed a voice-activated digital recorder in our bedroom. This is legal in Rhode Island, one-party consent, and I'm a party to any conversation in my own home. He drew a small recorder from the folder. I have 47 recordings of my wife and Thomas Bradley in that room, collected over 8 months, including direct discussion of their affair and their plans going forward. I'd like to play a brief excerpt, if permitted. I nodded, then remembered to speak it aloud. Yes, go ahead. He pressed play. A man's voice filled the courtroom. Does he suspect anything? A woman's voice, Jennifer's, unmistakable, answered, No, he's blind. He doesn't know anything. He can't. The man again, uncertain. You sure? He's pretty sharp. And then Jennifer, laughing carelessly. He's blind, Tom. He lives in the dark. We could do this in the same room and he wouldn't know. I watched Jennifer close her eyes at the defendant's table, and I understood in that moment that she had just heard out loud, in front of a judge, in front of her own attorney, in front of her husband, exactly how badly she had underestimated the man she'd married. David stopped the recording. Your Honor, I have 47 of these, all recorded legally in my own home. I also have testimony from my dog, in a manner of speaking. He rested a hand on Justice's head. She's trained to alert me to distress. About 6 months in, she began growling whenever Thomas Bradley came near our house, though she'd been friendly with him before. Guide dogs sense stress and dishonesty long before we have proof of it. Finally, Your Honor, financial records. My wife withdrew $12,000 in cash over 8 months, small amounts, always from ATMs near expensive retail stores. I called our bank for the records, then called those stores and described my wife. 3 confirmed expensive gifts purchased for a man. 1 jewelry store confirmed the sale of a $2,800 watch. My wife has never bought me a watch, Your Honor. I can't see one anyway. I need to pause the story here for just a moment. If you're feeling even a fraction of what I felt sitting on that bench, if you're starting to realize that perception runs so much deeper than sight, leave me a comment below and tell me about a time you knew something without ever seeing it. And go ahead and hit that like button right now, because this story is about to get even harder to look away from, and I want more people to hear it. I sat back in my chair for a moment, letting the silence in that courtroom settle. In 43 years on this bench, I have presided over thousands of divorce cases. I've heard every category of evidence a person can bring into a courtroom, but I had never once heard anything like what David Morrison had just laid out. A blind man who had documented his wife's infidelity with more precision, more discipline, and more restraint than most sighted investigators I'd seen testify in that same room. "Mrs. Morrison," I said, turning to Jennifer, "do you wish to respond to any of this?" She sat there, tears sliding down her face, ruining the careful makeup she'd put on that morning. Her attorney leaned in and whispered something urgent. Finally, in a small voice, she spoke. I didn't think he knew." "You thought," I said slowly, "that because he couldn't see you, you were invisible." "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. "I'm so sorry." David's expression didn't shift. No satisfaction, no anger, just the same calm certainty he'd carried through his entire testimony, as though he'd made peace with this outcome long before he ever walked into my courtroom. "Your Honor," Jennifer's attorney said, "my client acknowledges the affair. We aren't contesting the divorce itself, but we contest Mr. Morrison's request for full custody. A blind man cannot adequately care for 2 teenage children on his own." David's jaw tightened again, sharper this time. "Mrs. Morrison," I said, keeping my voice level, "your attorney just argued that your husband, who documented an 8-month affair using every sense except sight, who holds a full-time job as a software engineer, who has helped raise these children for 16 and 14 years, cannot care for them because he is blind." "Your Honor, he needs assistance," the attorney pressed. "He can't drive them places. He can't supervise them the way a sighted parent could." "I'd like to hear from the children," I said. "Are they present today?" David's attorney nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." I called a brief recess. When we reconvened, 2 teenagers sat in the witness area, a girl, 16, whose name was Emma, and a boy, 14, named Michael. I could see the resemblance to their father in both of them, the same steady posture, the same watchful stillness. "Emma," I said gently, "I need you to tell me about your father. What kind of parent is he?" Emma glanced at David, then back at me, her chin lifting slightly. "My dad is the best parent anyone could ask for. He's been taking care of us our whole lives. He knows everything about us. He knows when I'm upset before I say anything, because he hears it in my voice. He knows when my brother's lying about homework because he hears the stress underneath it. He knows when we're getting sick before we feel it ourselves. It sounds strange, but it's just true." "Does his blindness limit his parenting?" "No," Emma said, firm and immediate. "He taught me to ride a bike by running beside me, listening for a wobble. He taught Michael to throw a baseball by the sound of it hitting the glove. He's never missed a parent-teacher conference. He knows all our friends by their voices. He knows our schedules better than we know them ourselves." "And your mother?" Emma's face hardened, making her look older than 16. "My mother left us, not physically. She was still in the house, but she wasn't really there. For 8 months, she checked out to be with someone else. And none of us understood why until today. Dad was there the whole time. Dad is always there." Michael's testimony echoed hers. "Dad knows more about my life than Mom does. He asks questions. He actually listens. Mom's been somewhere else for months. Now I understand why." After the children finished testifying, I took a moment before delivering my ruling, because I wanted to be sure I said exactly what I meant. "I'm granting the divorce on the grounds of adultery. Mrs. Morrison's affair has been documented beyond any reasonable doubt, and frankly, beyond most doubt I've ever encountered in this courtroom. I am awarding primary custody to Mr. Morrison. The children have made their wishes plain, and I see absolutely no evidence that his blindness in any way impairs his ability to parent. If anything, his other senses appear to make him considerably more attentive than many sighted parents I've had the occasion to observe from this bench." I paused, letting that land. "I'm also ordering Mrs. Morrison to pay child support and to cover all legal fees associated with this proceeding, Her assumption that her husband's blindness rendered him unaware wasn't only mistaken, it was insulting to him and to this court. Jennifer wept quietly at the defendant's table. David sat still, one hand resting on Justice's head, his face unreadable in the way of a man who had already grieved this marriage long before the gavel ever came down. After the hearing, I asked David to stay behind for a moment in my chambers. He came in with Justice at his side and his attorney trailing a step behind him. "Mr. Morrison," I said once we were seated, "I've been a judge for 43 years. I've never seen anything quite like what you presented today. May I ask you something, off the record?" "Of course, Your Honor. How did you develop that kind of awareness? That kind of precision?" He was quiet for a moment, and then a small, genuine smile crossed his face, the first one I'd seen from him all day. "When you can't see, Your Honor, you learn to pay attention to everything else because you have to. Most people go through their entire lives looking without really seeing. They look at a face and don't hear the emotion sitting underneath the voice. They look at an object and never feel its presence in a room. They smell things constantly and never once register what those smells are trying to tell them." He shook his head slightly. "I've spent 35 years learning to perceive the world without sight. I experience it through sound waves, through scent, through vibration, through the way the air itself changes when someone enters a room. I know what my children are feeling from microscopic shifts in their breathing. I know when my dog is warning me about something by the tension in her muscles the instant I touch her." He turned his face toward me, and for a moment it felt like he was looking directly at me, even though I knew he couldn't be. "The truth, Your Honor, is that I see more than most sighted people ever will, precisely because I'm not distracted by what things merely look like. I experience what they actually are." I sat with that sentence for a long time after he left my chambers. I'm still sitting with it now, if I'm honest. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. David kept the house and primary custody. Jennifer was granted visitation every other weekend and ordered to pay child support. 6 months after that, I came across a small feature in the Providence Journal. David Morrison had started a nonprofit called Beyond Sight. He was teaching blind children how to develop their other senses the way he had decades earlier, out of necessity and grief. But he was also running workshops for sighted people, teaching them, of all things, how to perceive the world more fully by relying less on their eyes. Curiosity got the better of me, and I attended one of those workshops myself, off the bench, sitting anonymously in the back of a community center with about 30 other people. David stood at the front of the room, Justice lying calmly at his feet, and asked all of us to close our eyes. "For the next hour," he said, "you're going to experience the world the way I do. No sight, just everything else." He walked us through identifying ordinary objects by touch alone. He had us distinguish drinks purely by smell. He had volunteers walk across the room so the rest of us could learn to recognize people by their footsteps. He had us listen to short recordings and identify the emotion underneath the words, rather than reading it off a face the way we're trained to do from childhood. By the end of the hour, I watched 30 strangers leave that room with a completely different relationship to their own senses than the one they'd walked in with. One woman approached David afterward, wiping tears from her eyes before remembering he couldn't see them. "I've been married for 20 years, she told him, her voice shaking. "I just realized, sitting there with my eyes closed, that I've never really listened to my husband. I look at him. I don't actually hear what he's telling me." David nodded slowly. "That's what sight does to a lot of us, without our ever noticing. It makes us lazy. We lean on our eyes so heavily that we forget we have 4 other senses that are constantly telling us the truth if we'd only stop and listen to them." I've thought about David Morrison's case more times than I can count. I've thought about how a blind man saw his wife's affair with more clarity than she ever imagined possible, certain in her own bedroom that darkness meant safety. But more than that, I've thought about what he told me quietly in the privacy of my own chambers, that we go through this life looking without truly seeing, and how right he was. Since that case, I've started paying closer attention in my own courtroom than I ever did before. I listen to how people sound when they speak, not only to what they're saying. I notice the almost imperceptible change in pitch when stress or deception creeps into a voice. I pay attention to the energy sitting in a room, the tension underneath the surface of things. And in the years since, I've come to believe that David Morrison, a man who has not seen a single thing in 35 years, perceives more truth on any given day than most of us with perfectly functioning eyes will manage across an entire lifetime. Here's what I took away from his case, and what I hope you take away from hearing it. Sight is only one way of perceiving reality, and it isn't always the most reliable one. Truth doesn't only live in what we can see, it lives in sounds, in scents, in the feel of a room, in 1,000 small details our eyes routinely miss because they're too busy looking somewhere else. David Morrison could not see his wife's affair unfolding under his own roof, but he heard it in the register of her voice. He smelled it in the sheets of his own bed. He felt it in the 3 inches his nightstand had shifted. He sensed it in the change that came over his own dog. And he documented all of it with a precision that would be remarkable for anyone, sighted or not. He taught me something I don't think I'll ever fully unlearn, that we should never assume someone's limitation is only a limitation. Sometimes what looks from the outside like a weakness is quietly a different and deeper kind of strength. So I want to ask you something the same way David's testimony asked it of me that Tuesday morning. How much are you missing by relying only on your eyes? What truths are sitting in the sounds around you right now, in the smells you've stopped registering, in the feelings and the energy in a room that you're not paying attention to because you're too fixed on what you can visually confirm? Close your eyes for just a moment, right now, wherever you are. Listen to the world around you. Really listen to it. What do you hear that you hadn't noticed a minute ago? What can you learn about the space you're sitting in without using your eyes at all? David Morrison lives in a world with no visual light whatsoever, and yet he lives in a world absolutely rich with information that the rest of us walk past every single day without noticing. And in that world of his, truth is often clearer, more precise, and far more undeniable than anything the rest of us manage to see with our own 2 eyes. Now, before I let you go, I need to ask you for something. If this story changed the way you think about perception, about what it really means to see the truth, I need you to do 3 things for me. First, subscribe to this channel, because we tell stories that matter here, stories meant to make you think differently about the world around you. Second, share this video with someone who leans too heavily on appearances, someone who needs to hear that truth exists well beyond what we're able to see with our eyes. And third, leave a comment below and tell me about a time you perceived something important without ever seeing it, because we can learn a great deal from one another's stories, and I'd genuinely like to hear yours. I've sat on this bench for 43 years now. I've watched thousands of people testify in front of me. I've spent my entire career trying to separate truth from lies using every tool available to me. But David Morrison taught me that the most important truths in this life often exist far beyond sight, in the sound of a voice that softens when it shouldn't, in the scent of cologne where it has no business being, in the feeling that something has changed even when nothing looks any different at all. He showed me that blindness isn't always a disability. Sometimes it's simply a different way of seeing, a more accurate way, a more honest way, a truer way than most of us will ever know. Thank you for listening to this story all the way through. Thank you for being willing to think about perception in a new light. Thank you for understanding, alongside me, that seeing was never really about eyes to begin with. Pay attention to all of your senses and remember, wherever you are, that truth exists, whether or not you can see it. Because David Morrison proved in my own courtroom on an ordinary Tuesday in February that you don't need eyes to see everything that matters. You just need to pay attention.